New revelation. From Washington, D.C., here is Bret.
It's been more than 6 weeks since terrorists overran the United States consulate in Benghazi, Libya, and murdered our ambassador and 3 other Americans. It was 9/11, 2012. Some of the most important questions still linger unanswered. Who did this and why? Could the attack have been prevented or repelled after it began? What did the White House know and when? Fox News has been on this story from the very beginning. This hour, details you haven't heard. And as we enter the final stretch of the race for the White House, which side is closer to the truth? Those who argue this terrible tragedy was largely unforeseeable and unpreventable, and that the president should not be blamed? Or those who say we're seeing President Obama's foreign policy unraveling right on our TV screens? It was supposed to be one of the triumphs of President Obama's foreign policy, a Libya without Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi had been one of the world's worst sponsors of terrorism. Families of the 189 Americans murdered on Pan Am Flight 103 in 1988 knew that well. It's true, though, that after the 2003 invasion of Iraq, he even ended his secret nuclear program.
I, for one, didn't buy it and was deeply suspicious that Muammar Gaddafi may be playing us.
Frank Gaffney is president of the Center for Security Policy.
Muammar Gaddafi's transformation from rogue, eccentric, even bizarre terrorist sponsor into one of America's most reliable allies is, I think, going to be seen by historians as one of the more bizarre twists of American diplomatic history.
Whatever the case, by last year, Gaddafi became yet another repressive leader, caught by surprise in the Arab Spring of 2010. By the end of March 2011, world leaders are calling for him to go.
Muammar Gaddafi has lost legitimacy to lead, and he must leave.
President Obama adds more than his voice. He orders the Pentagon to provide air support. One anonymous Obama staffer describes the strategy as leading from behind, a characterization the Obama administration officially rejected.
What the Libya operation represented was burden sharing.
P.J. Crowley was Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs at the time.
The United States participated significantly, but granted greater responsibility to France, Great Britain, Italy, countries that had a much greater stake in the outcome.
April 5th, 2011. Gaddafi still holds Tripoli, but the rebels control Benghazi. The State Department sends diplomat Christopher Stevens there. His 12-man team sets up shop in the Tibesti Hotel. June 1st, a car bomb explodes in the parking lot in front of that hotel. Stevens and his team decide it's too dangerous to stay there. In August, they settle on a compound on the west side of the city.
It was rented from an owner who had a nice villa there and several other outbuildings as well.
Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood is a 24-year U.S. Special Forces veteran who worked on security for U.S. personnel in Libya for 6 months before the September 11, 2012 Benghazi attack.
But not a lot of security.
Like in any residence, they're not a fortress.
Inside the walls are 4 buildings. One is essentially a large residence with a number of bedrooms in it. Another residence has a cantina where the staff eats. Just across the way is what they call their Tactical Operations Center, filled with offices for security staff, phones, and security monitors. Finally, the barracks, a small house by the main gate of the compound. It will house a Libyan security force.
Many viewers, I guess, who've traveled around Europe and Asia probably think one of those heavily guarded fortresses where you go to get your visa. That's not what we're talking about here.
Correct. I think the correct term for it is embassy property because it wasn't fortified.
Sirte, Libya, October 20th, 2011. Colonel Gaddafi is captured and killed by rebels in his hometown. With Gaddafi gone, Stevens is officially named ambassador. He will spend much of his time at the main U.S. Embassy building in Tripoli. But he'll come to Benghazi often. The State Department upgrades the physical security at that property. Charlene Lamb of the State Department.
We extended the height of the outer wall to 12 feet with masonry concrete, barbed wire, and concertina razor wire.
Finally, inside the large residence, a fortified safe haven is built. You enter through a heavy metal grill with several locks on it. Tell me about this safe haven.
Simply bars on windows, bars on the wall. You're just building a jail cell, basically. You're going to get inside, and it's a delay until you can get some relief to get out of there.
After the bombing in Beirut decades ago, we created a minimum standard for facilities across the world.
Utah Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz serves on the subcommittee on crime, terrorism, and homeland security.
This facility in Benghazi didn't meet those minimum standards and didn't meet the minimum standards for the number of personnel that should have been there protecting.
Security on the compound consists of 5 diplomatic security special agents and 4 members of the Libyan government security force called the 17th February Brigade. There is more security at what's called the Annex, now known to be a CIA facility a mile away. Based in Tripoli, but moving around the country, is a Department of Defense site security team. February 12, 2012, Lieutenant Colonel Wood arrives in Libya as the new commander of the SST.
It had 16 members?
Yes.
What exactly did they all do?
The site security team with special operations soldiers that had extra skills and capabilities they could bring to the embassy.
Could a team that small really make a difference?
The caliber of individuals on that team were the best in the United States inventory. Yeah, they can make a difference in any firefight.
The problem, however, is that SST is slated to end its tour in Libya by summer's end, and the security situation is taking an ominous turn.
Spring of 2012, there was an uptick in terror attacks in Libya. Is that right?
That's true. I think the nature of things started to change. When I first got on the ground, it was a lot of lawlessness going back and forth. As things progressed, the commotion settled down a little bit, but the targeted attacks seemed to pick up, and they seemed to be targeting more toward Westerners.
Targeting more towards Westerners. Libya had just got over a civil war, but for the Americans stationed there, the danger was just beginning. When we return, Americans in Libya become targets after the break. Returning to our investigation, we told you how Libya, after the death of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, was an unstable and dangerous place. But the violence was mostly Libyan on Libyan, people jockeying for power, old scores being settled. In the spring of 2012, that would change. Americans and their allies in Libya found themselves increasingly in the crosshairs. April 6, 2012, a bomb is tossed over the wall of the Benghazi compound. June 6th, an IED is placed on the compound's north gate. No one is injured in either incident. That's not the case 5 days later. June 11th, 2012, a convoy transporting Great Britain's ambassador, Sir Dominic Asquith, is ambushed in Benghazi. He isn't hurt, but 2 of his security aides are. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood was the U.S. security site team commander in Libya.
Clear that was a terrorist attack.
I actually conducted an investigation a couple of days afterwards, walked the ground, took photographs, examined the vehicle. So they knew what they were doing, and it was definitely an assassination attempt by skilled operators. But as I could see it, I could see the adversary growing stronger, and we were the last thing on our target list.
All told, there have been more than 230 security incidents in Libya in the past year. Ambassador Stevens grows more and more worried, and says so in a series of cables sent to Washington, like this one on June 25th, entitled "Libya's Fragile Security Deteriorates as Tribal Rivalries, Power Plays, and Extremism Intensify." He writes, Libyan extremists are, quote, targeting international organizations and foreign interests. That's why Wood and Eric Nordstrom, regional security officer, implored the State Department to keep Wood's SST force in the country beyond its scheduled August departure.
We weren't requesting additional security. We were requesting to keep the security that we had, and that was being taken away.
So you want to keep your team on the ground, the team that was in place already?
Yeah, and my team was only a small part. There was MSD, State Department MSD.
That stands for Mobile Security Detachment Team.
A lot of those are ex-Green Berets, ex-Navy SEALs, excellently trained folks. There was 3 MSD teams when I got on the ground there.
August 5th, 2012, State decides not to keep the SST in Libya. The MSD team is being reduced as well.
Why do you think this request was denied?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton.
I think that what was motivating the State Department was that if we had security that would have truly been appropriate, it would have been an admission that conditions on the ground in Libya were not safe. And that would have violated the worldview that this had been an administration success.
August 8th, just 3 days after the State Department pulls the heavy security teams from Benghazi, Ambassador Stevens sends another cable about the, quote, violent incidents that dominated the political landscape. Stevens writes, quote, what we have seen are not random crimes of opportunity, but rather targeted and discriminate attacks. Less than a week later, Lieutenant Colonel Wood and his military site security team would leave the country.
How did you feel about the security situation when you left?
I didn't like it, and I said as much, and my concerns were specifically for Benghazi.
Ambassador Stevens was a great diplomat, and being a great diplomat in a dynamic place like Libya means taking care of lots of different things.
Counsel to the Libyan government, David Tafuri, is a former State Department official who knew Stevens.
Certainly he was concerned about security. He was concerned about some of the developments in Libya. I think he was being a very wise, careful diplomat and taking note of all the things that were happening.
September 11th, 2012. That afternoon, a mob gathers at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt. They scale the walls and burn the American flag, angry apparently over an obscure anti-Islam video produced in California. While there's plenty of action in Cairo, all is quiet at the compound in Benghazi. Still, sometime before 6 p.m., Ambassador Stevens sends another cable to the State Department, reporting, quote, growing problems with security in Benghazi, and, quote, growing frustration on part of the local residents with Libyan police and security forces. These forces, the ambassador writes, are too weak to keep the country secure. A few hours later, he would be murdered.
We weren't there. We just weren't there.
And if you were, could you have protected Ambassador Stevens?
Well, the more guns you have in a firefight, the better chance you have of winning.
What exactly happened on the night of September 11th, 2012 in Benghazi? Greg Palcott has been on the scene. Up next, a timeline of heroism and disaster with new details you haven't heard before.